I try and be quite strict that, I do my daily tasks. If I completed my tasks, I'm going to stop because I know I have other things to take care of. Done is better than perfect is the phrase that he always gives me. Well, you will find the time if you really want to do it. That's the thing. And that's a tool that I use as well, personally. Weirdly or not, I was influenced to use Notion because I've heard a lot about Notion. And I'm sure a lot of you guys heard about Notion already or have used Notion as well. And it's a great tool, but and it has a lot of great functionalities for enhancing your workflow. But to be really, really frank with you and to really be honest, if you're looking at a place to take notes, this can be a tool that you have on your laptop, like Word document. This can be a Word document drive. This really doesn't matter that much. Of course, this is just talking about the note taking side. So before you start something, you want to drop down some ideas. Well, I would encourage you to use Notion because it just gives you a nicer user experience. It will make you a little more excited about the whole process. It'll allow you to kind of structure the solutions and kind of your ideas into specific places. Notion offers a lot of kind of templates that you can already use, which really speeds up the workflow, which can really kind of, enhance your productivity in this case. It can make it more visual for your ideas to come into place rather than having them, just simply written down on a piece of paper. So for note taking and just general management and making sure that your ideas are in a place that are much more visual and, possibly to kind of motivate you to follow those ideas where maybe you can create like little checkboxes to tick off the steps that you have completed. Well, I think Notion would be my recommendation there. And that's a tool that I use as well, personally. I've learned how to use it. It does take maybe, some time to learn it, maybe watch a video or two of how to use Notion to really get the benefit of it, which I'd suggest you do rather than maybe jumping in and playing around on your own. Unless you have the time, of course. But it's a great tool that I find useful in my day-to-day life. If I want to drop something down, if I want to not forget something, so that's great. Now, then there is the other part, which kind of is more technical and more strategic, is tools that allow you to essentially make sure that the final tasks that you actually want to implement in the project or the website that you're creating or whatever come into place, and essentially to manage them on a timely basis. Now, the tool I would mostly recommend for that is Linear. Linear essentially is a task manager. It has like little boxes that you can drag and sort them for things that you haven't started yet, things that are ongoing, things that are maybe in review, things that you have completed. And then you can, for each kind of, you can set essentially in Linear, you can send sprints. Sprints is a word in tech, essentially. So you would actually might be familiar with a sprint when you're working for a tech company. And it's essentially a designated amount of time to complete a series of tasks and to achieve that final goal. So essentially, Linear.app is almost like a task manager. There's some other tools that offer the same thing as Linear. There's tools like Monday.com that you maybe heard of. There's tools like ClickUp that also allow you to do this. And we'll write all of these down in a little bit. And essentially, all these tools, they allow you to break a task. So like I was saying, let's imagine that we're designing a basic website. And on that website, for example, you want a landing page that is selling a specific product. So what you would do is that one big task that you aim to complete maybe in 2 weeks. So you're going to set your sprint to 2 weeks, right? And then you need to break that task down into smaller steps. So the smaller steps would be, create the main page, create the main animated title, add like maybe all the description that's required for, this product to work, add some imaging, add some other assets. And you would break it down into small steps that you find feasible for yourself. And then you would put them into not done, into it's essentially divided into many columns, and you have like little blocks where you define all those tasks. And then you can drag those blocks essentially from the things that you have started to the things that are ongoing, to the things that maybe you are reviewing or require a PR, a pull request at GitHub, to the things that might have been completed. So Linear.app, Monday.com, and ClickUp are 3 of those tools that are quite essential here for task planning and task management. I use Linear. I think it's the friendliest of them all. It's just quite simple to use and create tasks and just manage. So I definitely highly recommend that. Monday.com is a bit more fun and playful and friendly for those that like a lot of colors and like a lot of kind of more kind of sections and activities of splitting bigger tasks into smaller tasks and those smaller tasks into like tiny tasks. That's Monday.com. I recommend that. At our startup currently, at our tech startup, we do use Linear. Linear is kind of, we orient Linear more to the development team, to the research and development team. And then Monday.com is mostly used by our marketing team. So you can kind of see how the more technical to the more creativity kind of tools get split apart, but they do pretty much the same thing. Now there is tools that we can focus on for essentially creating and developing the whole process. So at this point, there is many tools out there that are quite essential. So if, for example, if we're talking about web development, and that's something that I can kind of, talk about in this session and talk about the tools that are relevant there, especially for productivity. Well, there is a lot of stages in an app that, for example, might be quite difficult. So here we're going to reflect on all the no code or low code solutions that are available out there that you can use. So when creating a whole application, that's quite complex to do, right? There is a lot of, things that you have to figure out. There is, for example, not just creating the main page and how it looks. It's also, for example, if you want to have users, you need to think about how the user is going to log in and register. That's the whole process of authentication. Then there is what roles the users can get in the system. And then essentially what tasks can they do based on their role and their permissions. That's the whole concept of authorization in an application. Then, for example, you might have things like taking payments. Well, that in itself, would you want to write that? Well, I'd be too scared myself, right? So essentially, I'd be too scared to even do the payment because there's so many little caveats there that you could make a mistake on. So there is other tools out there that allow you to do this and increase your productivity. Now the whole point is, going back to what I said previously, is to focus on the final value of what you want to create, and then try and help yourself reach that final point. So in this case, for example, just to give you a brief example for those 3 points. So for example, there is so many teams and companies out there that dedicate a whole list of specialists and people who are really familiar with the subject to create a tool that allows you to do something very simply in a matter of sometimes even a few minutes to achieve the same outcome as you might do yourself for like a whole week of development and so on and so forth. So for example, if we want to log in a user, or if we want to make sure that the user is authenticated and forget about the whole complexity of doing that, there's tools like, for example, clerk.dev. Clerk.dev is an authentication provider. Essentially, it's just embedding some code snippets, and then suddenly, not only that you have the login, logout register, it also gives you the whole user settings where they can send their profile picture, where they can set their information, where they can check what device they have logged in from, and if the login is secure. I mean, it's incredible. And literally with clerk.dev, it's 6 lines of code that you have to copy into your app, and you've got it all out of the box. The other amazing thing about this tool is that it already offers you a database solution. You don't even have to implement your own database. Essentially, that's already within the app. So what do I do? Do I go and create all of this on my own and spend absolutely hours and weeks on making sure that not only it works, but if it's secure because we're dealing with user data and so on and so forth? Or are we literally just going to use this one tool that lets us implement the solution in 15 minutes and move on to the next step, to the actual value of the product? Well, of course, we're going to do that. And the great thing about all these tools, you don't have to worry about paying for them, because if you're using them on your own, they're pretty much all free. You really don't have to pay for anything. It's only when you get to like business or enterprise solutions, they require a payment. But if you're just learning to do something quickly, they're all free. You don't even have to worry about paying. You just need to register and implement it into your code. So it's great. Same thing with authorization, giving roles to users. Now, authorization is super complex when it comes to creating it. And a lot of companies, for example, when I worked for Cisco, within Cisco internally, there were so many little teams that worked on a separate project. And of course, access had to be granted to the right people, the people that can use it or not. And every single team created their homebrew solution, right? So every single team had to dedicate some developer time and pay those developers So within those teams at Cisco, all those little teams, essentially, they had to do a homebrew solution themselves. And that took so much time and so much effort. And then essentially it slowed that whole team down on actually reaching what we wanted to achieve. And yet again, there is tools that are already created by amazing people that allow you to do this. Now, for authorization, there is tools like permit.io. That's the startup I work for. And actually, the reason I'm saying it's not to advertise the startup I work for, but actually we're leading the space, and we've got a solution that, you know, is working for a lot of people. We've got a lot of, you know, nice companies that are already working for us, but we also are based on open source, which is very relevant. So if you guys want to contribute to open source, you're more than welcome to contribute to an open source within our company. And I'll also help you and guide you on how to do that. So you can kind of maybe work with me a little bit, but we'll kind of come back to that at the end. So, you know, but essentially it's another tool that stops you doing all this hassle. With payments, there's things like Stripe. I'm sure you heard of Stripe. So what I've described to you is free tools that allow you to get started with an app. Allows you to get payments, make sure that everything is valid before you show any of maybe the content that you were willing to sell. Let's say it's a shop or whatever. And if you give this to a developer, actually you would need a whole team of developers to do that. And why would you do that if you can do it yourself in a day, maybe 2 days, let's say maybe even a week? I mean, you know, that's saving you so much time. And this is so productive for you to achieve something that, you know, later on, you know, can give you value and make your business grow. And I kind of just now started to realize that, you know, as much as we are focusing on productivity, I'm also kind of giving a business lesson and showing you how to kind of work with a business in the beginning to make sure that it's actually successful and not to come across the problems that I have. I have to manage my own time, and I have to figure out what's most productive for me to actually be able to do what I do. Being very honest, it's actually quite hard. Because, well, my startup, with any startup that you join, and I highly suggest any of you guys, if you're ever thinking of going into a tech career or you already started, you do look into joining a startup, because you'll get to experience a much different kind of approach into how tech is done and how fast-paced tech is. Now, of course, with any startup, you know, you've got your 9-to-5 kind of job, but it doesn't always work that way, because you at a small startup take on a lot of responsibility. And, you know, there's also much more time that you might sometimes have to dedicate to something because it's important and you care about the business. Now, that's already trying to manage and stay more productive. And that's already kind of blocking you in being productive. Now, on top of that, of course, there is YouTube that takes a lot of time. And it's not even just the time that it takes me to plan a video and to film a video. It's also the time that takes me to edit the video. That's the worst part here. And that's the part that I really, you know, struggle to find the time for. And, you know, and then of course, running other side hustles and businesses and making sure that, you know, I can advocate to people and try and sell what I've learned. Well, it's hard. It's hard. And the problem is I've lost so many night hours because of it, because I just couldn't find the time in a normal day. So I had to lose sleep because of it. Sometimes you have to do it, but sometimes you have to find ways to improve the workflow and to stay a little bit more productive, take care a little bit more about yourself. I think that's also very important. You know, as developers, we sit by the desk a lot of the time, hours upon hours. It's very important to kind of avoid that and to do other things as well. So, well, how do I manage it? Well, I try to be quite strict with my work. Yes, of course, sometimes there are scenarios where people are, you know, when I have to stay a bit longer, but, you know, I try and be quite strict that, you know, I do my daily tasks. If I completed my tasks, I'm going to stop, because I know I have other things to take care of. I think there is one thing that is quite important that I've learned. And I've learned this from my CEO. Of course, yes, you can imagine he's probably even busier than me. And essentially, done is better than perfect is the phrase that he always gives me. And by following that kind of example, essentially, rather than focusing on perfecting things, which usually take a lot of time, and that's the things that you end up you know, utilizing more time for, and then forgetting that you've now spent your whole day of time doing something, is to really try and split up things to the point where it's finished and it's the minimum work that works before perfecting it. And essentially that will kind of really minimize the time you spend on something and allow you to give you more flexibility to manage the remaining time. So That's one thing. The other thing is, and this is kind of on the contrary, but it's like, if you really want to do something and you don't have the time for it, well, you will find the time if you really want to do it. That's the thing. Unfortunately, it's probably, I don't know if this comes as a positive thing to share, or something that maybe is negative but people will start doing. But it you know, essentially, done is better than perfect, and if you really want to do something, you will find the time to do it. There is no excuse. So if you find an excuse and you don't want to do it, well, that really kind of means to yourself that it doesn't really matter that much. You can kind of delay it to another day, right? So, you know, in general, I find it hard. I do plan all my work. I make sure that I know what I'm doing each day. I don't plan it to the minute. I do have one crazy friend, which is very kind of OCD, and he takes a whole journal and he literally plans everything to 5 minutes of his time during the day. I don't do that. I think that's a little bit over the top. I mean, if that helps you out, of course, absolutely, you should do it. But I don't. I just make sure that my daily task is, okay, so I have my job and I need to do these 4 things and complete them today. I have my YouTube, I've planned the video, I just need to record it and put it into Adobe to get ready for editing. And then maybe I have some other things, reply to some emails, whatnot. And that's kind of where I ended, and I restrict myself. I try not to overdo myself. And I think you should be very careful of that. It's very easy to overdo your time and to think that you're productive, but essentially you'll end up not being productive, because the more you do, the more tired you get and the more your further tasks elongate. So sometimes it's better to chop it off, rest, get up an hour earlier the next day, and then do that same task, you know, 4 times faster than you have done before. And I see a bunch of comments in the chat, and then a lot of questions. So yeah, let's go with the next question.
Yeah, so there's a question here. As a full stack developer, do you recommend learning no-code tools like Webflow, Bubble.io side by side?
So you have to be quite strategic about what you pick to learn and what you want to do. It always comes down to the fact of, are you planning to work for someone and create websites for them, or are you doing something for yourself and you need a quick outcome that gives you value? Well, if you need a quick outcome, so for example, you have this idea, and for this idea to work, you need a website for people to find maybe something, a solution that you're offering or whatever, I would 100% use a tool like Webflow or Bubble.io or Wix or whatever other, you know, website builders there are out there to create something very quickly. Excuse me. To then, of course, you know, have something already in place rather than spending hours trying to learn something and then, of course, delaying the final outcome. Now, if you want to actually end up working and producing websites for other people, then maybe focusing on no-code tools like website builders is not the right thing. Website builders are kind of an exception here, because with website builders, they're quite limited to what you can do. You know, I think at this point, if you're talking about no-code and low-code tools, I think the best kind of mix here would be to learn how to set up your own website, a framework that kind of integrates well with many tools. So for example, here I would recommend Next.js. That's based on React. It's a React full stack framework. And essentially, once you know how to set up a project, then you can incorporate no-code tools that are designed for Next.js to kind of help you build that website much faster. So like, to summarize, if you want to execute a website in like 2 days, make it look nice and offer instant value, use tools that like Webflow, for example, or Bubble.io, or there's, you know, tons of others right now that exist. Or if you want to kind of develop things and maybe even make money from web dev, work as a freelancer, learn how to create a basic website structure with Next.js. That would be my recommendation. And then learn how to incorporate those no-code tools inside Next.js. It's actually very simple. Once you get the hang of one, it's almost a very similar process for the rest. So a roadmap for navigating development in challenging environments. Okay. So essentially, I guess that's kind of how would I overcome, you know, obstacles where, you know, I might be blocked by something. And I think that the one example that comes to my mind that, you know, I've learned from my own experience is the fact that I wasn't technical enough to do something that I wanted to achieve. So having the idea is one thing, but obviously implementing the technicality is the other, right? And that's quite complex. Now, a lot of the time I find, and I feel a lot of you kind of guys will be able to follow along the same lines and comprehend with me, is the fact that you think that you don't know something, and then you go to research how to implement it, and suddenly you feel so overwhelmed that this is so complex and you just don't get it. And it's super demotivating. Trust me, I've been in that place so many times. It's a very normal feeling to have. The thing I found is that once you start to pursue trying to learn it, and yes, the next 2 days, you will absolutely have no idea what you're doing. It's like, but you're going to be trying it. Every single thing that I've tried before, that I've kind of persisted on, and I said, no, I'm going to learn this, and there is no other thing I want right now. At one point, there is this moment in time where something just clicks, and then suddenly you start to understand it. And then it's just about learning that approach to overcome that really weird, overwhelming feeling that I'm sure a lot of you had here, and I did, and just trying something, even though you don't get it, just like jumping into deep water and seeing what happens. And then if you do that enough for that specific topic, you will actually start to get it. It's very strange, and you'll see it actually happen. And that's essentially it. It happens all around tech, in every kind of situation or scenario of developing something. And it's a huge obstacle that's super demotivating. But I suggest all of you guys actually try it, and you'll see how interesting actually it changed, that you get that click in your head when suddenly you start to actually understand it. And the more you do it with any other tech, you adapt. And then essentially, once you do it like a few times, let's say you do 10 times, and you pick subjects that you don't get, that you try and learn, and then you start to understand any new subject after that, it's going to be an easy process for you, because you've already learned how to do it. And you've already learned the feeling of that weird anxiety that you need to overcome. And then suddenly you're going to, combat the world, essentially. It's, I think a lot of people get stuck up on the fact that they see something that's complicated and they just give up. And I mean, it's fine to give up. I did it many times. Of course, it's a normal thing, but sometimes it's just worth trying and persisting and see what happens. And I'm sure a lot of you guys will be surprised.